Her ex took everything in the divorce, leaving her with nothing but a name on a piece of paper. But that paper led to an old sawmill, and what she discovered there would change not just her future, but the story of her past. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom, like the story of your life was written by someone else, and you were just a character with no lines, stick with me. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're about to talk about what it means to rebuild from the foundation up, even when you think the foundation is gone. The end of my marriage didn't feel like an explosion. It was more like the slow, silent crumble of a cliff face into a cold sea. For months, there was just the quiet sound of things falling away. First the laughter, then the shared glances, then the simple comfort of another person's presence in a room. By the time the lawyers got involved, the house was already hollow, an echo chamber of what used to be. Marcus, my now ex-husband, was methodical. He was a surgeon excising a tumor, and I was the tumor. He had the better lawyer, the clearer narrative, the support of a family whose wealth was as old and sturdy as the oak trees on their estate. I had a public defender who sighed a lot and a narrative that was messy with grief and confusion. The final decree arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a crisp, manila envelope, deceptively light, as if it couldn't possibly contain the weight of a decade of my life. I was living in a room I'd rented in a part of the city I didn't know, a place with thin walls and the constant smell of someone else's cooking. The room contained a bed, a chair, and 2 cardboard boxes of my belongings that Marcus had deemed personal effects of no marital value. My father's old watch, a handful of books, a photo of my mom, that was it. Everything else, the house we'd built, the furniture we'd chosen, the art we'd collected, the savings we'd accrued, had been absorbed into his column on the spreadsheet. The judge had called it an equitable distribution. It felt like an erasure. I sat on the edge of the squeaky mattress and held the papers. I didn't read them. I didn't have to. I knew what they said. They said I was alone. They said I was starting over with less than zero. Because along with no assets, I'd been assigned a portion of a credit card debt I hadn't even known existed. It was over. He had won. For 3 days, I didn't do much of anything. I moved between the bed and the chair. I watched the light change on the water-stained ceiling. The world felt distant. A movie playing on a screen in another room. Then, on Friday, another envelope arrived. This one was different. It wasn't from a law firm. It was pale brown, made of that cheap, fibrous paper governments use. The return address was for the tax assessor's office of a place I'd never heard of, Blackwood County. I almost threw it away, assuming it was a mistake, another piece of junk mail in a life that now felt defined by refuse. But something made me pause. My name, Clara Wells, was printed clearly on the front. Not my married name, my maiden name. I slid it open with my thumbnail. The paper inside was a formal notice, printed in a dense, intimidating font. It was a final warning of tax delinquency. It stated that property taxes on a parcel of land, identified by a long string of numbers, were 3 years overdue. If the balance $782 was not paid within 60 days, the county would seize the property and sell it at public auction. I scanned the document, confused. I didn't own any property. I owned 2 cardboard boxes and a mountain of debt. Then my eyes caught the description of the parcel. Property description, 42.5 acres, containing 1 disused commercial structure formerly known as the Stone Creek Sawmill. Stone Creek. The name was a ghost on my tongue. It wasn't a place I'd ever been, but it was a place I knew. My father, before he passed away when I was 19, used to talk about it. It was where he grew up, a tiny dot on a map in the state's rugged, forgotten northern region. He'd left when he was 18 and never went back. Or so I thought. A sawmill. He had been a carpenter, a man who spoke the language of wood. The scent of pine and cedar was the background scent of my childhood. It had to be a mistake, some clerical error from decades ago. Maybe my grandfather had owned it, but the notice was clear. The registered owner was Clara Wells. My birth date was listed correctly. My social security number was redacted except for the last 4 digits, and they were mine. According to Blackwood County, I, the woman who couldn't afford to buy a new box of cereal until my next temp job paycheck cleared, owned 42.5 acres of land and an entire sawmill. It was absurd, it was impossible, and in the silent gray emptiness of that rented room, it was the first thing that had felt like anything at all in months. It was a question mark in a life that had become a period. My first instinct was to call Marcus. It was a reflex, a habit burned into my nerves from 10 years of partnership. He would know what to do. He was the one who handled finances, documents, the complicated architecture of adult life. I actually picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over his name, which I still hadn't deleted. Then a cold wave of remembrance washed over me. He wasn't the person I called for help anymore. He was the person I needed help to recover from. He would probably laugh, or worse, he would see an angle, a way to claim this too. He'd find a loophole that proved this forgotten property was somehow marital asset he'd overlooked. The thought was enough to make me put the phone down, my hand trembling slightly. No. Whatever this was, it was mine to figure out. The name on the paper was Wells, not his. I spent the next 2 days in the sterile quiet of the public library, using their computers to dig. Blackwood County was even smaller and more remote than I'd imagined. Population 2,100. Main industries: logging declining and correctional facilities growing. Stone Creek was barely a town, more a loose collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads. I found the county's public records portal, a clunky website that looked like it was designed in 1998. After an hour of wrestling with its search function, I found it. Parcel 7B443, owner Wells Clara. I clicked on the digital record. The history was there in a series of dry, dated entries. The property had been purchased 15 years ago. The buyer was a trust administered by a law office in Stone Creek. 2 years ago, on my 28th birthday, the ownership had been automatically transferred from the trust directly into my name. 2 years ago, I was still married to Marcus then. We were living in our beautiful house, going on vacations, hosting dinner parties. On the surface, everything was fine, but underneath, the rot was setting in. I just hadn't been able to see it yet. Why would my father, who had been gone for almost a decade, set something like this in motion? He had left me very little. A life insurance policy that barely covered his funeral costs and a toolbox full of antique hand planes. We weren't a family with secrets or hidden assets. We were a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. The trust, that was the key. It was designed to keep the property hidden, managed by a third party until a specific date, my birthday. He had set it up so that on my 28th birthday, this land and this mill would become mine, free and clear. But why? And why hadn't anyone told me? The law firm listed as the trustee was Gable & Sons. A quick search showed they were still in business. Though it seemed to be just one Gable now, a Mr. Alistair Gable, I had two options. I could call this lawyer in a town I'd never seen and ask questions that would reveal how completely lost I was. Or I could ignore the letter. I could let the county seize the property. It was, after all, just a piece of paper, a ghost from a past I barely understood. Selling it for back taxes felt like the simplest path. It was a clean break, but the thought of it felt wrong, like a betrayal. My father had done this for a reason. For 15 years, him, and then this trust, had been paying the taxes, keeping this place safe, waiting for me, and for the last 3 years since it had become mine without my knowledge, the taxes had gone unpaid. The notice said 60 days. The clock was ticking. I looked at my bank account online. I had $317.58. The taxes were nearly $5,000. The amount was laughable. But the drive to Stone Creek? That was maybe doable. It was about 250 miles north. A tank and a half of gas in my aging sedan. I could sleep in the car if I had to. I had nothing to lose. My temp agency wouldn't miss me for a few days. And my rented room felt more like a cage than a home. What was I staying for? To watch more light fade on the stained ceiling. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake and thought about my dad. He was a quiet man with hands that were calloused and kind. He could build anything, a bookshelf, a gazebo, a confidence. But he was not a man of grand gestures or long-term financial plans. He was a man who fixed what was broken, right in front of him. The idea of him buying a whole sawmill felt out of character, like a bird buying an anchor. Yet the papers didn't lie. He had done it, and he had hidden it. The question was, what was he trying to protect me from? The answer felt terrifyingly obvious. He was protecting me from the life I had just finished living. He had seen something in Marcus, something I had refused to see for 10 years, and he had built me a lifeboat. A splintered, half-sinking, forgotten lifeboat, but a lifeboat nonetheless. And it was waiting for me in a place called Stone Creek. The next morning, I packed one of my 2 cardboard boxes into the trunk of my car. I filled a thermos with coffee from the communal pot in the hallway of my building. I left a note for the landlord with the last of my cash for the week's rent, telling him I'd be back in a few days. As I pulled out of the city, the sun was just beginning to burn the gray haze off the horizon. The sprawling suburbs gave way to farmland, which in turn gave way to rolling hills that grew steeper and more forested with every passing mile. The highway narrowed from 4 lanes to 2. The radio stations dissolved into static one by one until there was only the hum of my tires on the asphalt. I was driving away from my life, but for the first time in a long time, It felt like I was driving towards something instead of just drifting. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with something else, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. The journey north was a slow shedding of a skin I hadn't realized was so tight. The endless concrete and glass of the city were replaced by towering pines and granite cliffs. The air that came through my open window started to smell clean, of damp earth and pine needles. It smelled like my father's workshop. I passed towns with names like Hemlock and Ridgefield, places where the main street was the only street and the tallest building was a church steeple. It was a different world, slower, older. I arrived in Stone Creek just before dusk. It was less a town and more a suggestion of one. There was a gas station with pumps that looked like they were from the 1970s, a diner with a flickering neon sign that just said, "Eat," a squat brick post office, and a handful of houses. And that was it. The place felt tired, worn down by time and economic hardship. I found the law office of Gable & Sons easily, as it was the only two-story building on the main drag right next to the diner. The lights were off. A sign on the door said the hours were 9 to 4, Monday to Friday. I was a day late. I decided to find the sawmill first. The directions on the tax notice were simple. Follow the old logging road 3 miles east of town. The road was more dirt than gravel, and my car complained with every rut and pothole. The trees crowded in, their branches forming a canopy that plunged the road into a premature twilight. Then the woods opened up and I saw it. It was magnificent and heartbreaking all at once. The main building was huge, a long, cavernous structure with a high-peaked roof, its wooden siding weathered to a soft silver gray. Large multi-paned windows, most of them broken, stared out like vacant eyes. A massive, rusted circular saw blade was still mounted near what must have been the main entrance, a silent, toothy guardian. Surrounding it were smaller, auxiliary buildings in various states of collapse and acres of land, disappearing into the encroaching forest, dotted with stacks of rotting lumber that looked like the ancient bones of giants. The place wasn't just abandoned, it felt asleep, dreaming of a time when the air was filled with the roar of machinery and the sharp, clean scent of cut pine. I parked the car and got out. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the pines. I walked toward the main building, my footsteps loud on the gravel. There was a heavy chain and a rusted padlock on the main doors, but a smaller door on the side of the building hung slightly ajar, creaking softly on its hinges. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was thick and cool, heavy with the ghosts of a million trees. Dust motes danced like fairies in the long shafts of light slanting down from the grimy windows high above. The main floor was a vast, open space, dominated by the silent, hulking machinery of the mill. Conveyor belts, saw rigs, and debarkers sat in silent rows, covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. It was a cathedral of industry left to the gods of rust and decay. I ran my hand along a massive iron flywheel. It was cold and solid, a piece of a world I couldn't imagine. At the far end of the building, a set of stairs led up to a small enclosed office that overlooked the mill floor. The door was unlocked. Inside it was a time capsule. A heavy wooden desk, a swivel chair with cracked leather, and a wall of built-in shelves. Papers were scattered across the desk, curled and yellowed with age. An old rotary phone sat in the corner like a museum piece, but it was the filing cabinets that drew my attention. They were tall, metal, and painted a drab olive green. Most were empty, their drawers hanging open, but the bottom drawer of the one in the corner was closed and locked. I jiggled the handle, but it was solid. I looked around the office for a key, checking under the desk blotter, in the pencil holder, on the dusty shelves, nothing. I was about to give up when my eyes fell on a loose floorboard under the desk. It was just slightly raised, as if it didn't quite fit. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was the kind of thing he would do. My dad loved secret compartments, hidden nooks. He once built a bookshelf for me with a hollowed-out book that opened into a little treasure box. I knelt down and worked my fingernails into the crack. The board came up with a soft groan of old wood, and there, nestled in the dark space beneath, was a small, flat brass key. It was old, but it gleamed faintly in the dim light. I knew, even before I tried it, that it would fit. The lock on the filing cabinet clicked open with a satisfying thud. The drawer slid out smoothly, silently. It wasn't empty. Inside, sitting perfectly in the center, was a gray metal box, like a small safe, with a heavy-duty combination lock on the front. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was what he'd left for me. But there was no combination. I searched the drawer, the space under the floorboards again, everywhere. Nothing, just the box, locked and impenetrable. Frustration and disappointment washed over me. I had come all this way, found this secret place, only to be stopped by a lock I couldn't open. I sat down in the dusty chair, the heavy metal box in my lap, and for the first time since I'd left the city, I cried. I cried for my failed marriage, for my empty bank account, for the father I missed so desperately. And I cried because I was so close to an answer, and it was locked away from me. I must have fallen asleep in that chair, because I woke up with a start to the sound of a vehicle approaching. Headlights cut through the broken windows of the mill, sweeping across the dusty machinery. Panic seized me. I was trespassing. Who would be coming out here in the middle of the night? I scrambled under the desk, clutching the metal box to my chest, my heart pounding against my ribs. The vehicle, a large truck from the sound of it, pulled up outside and killed its engine. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. A powerful flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the main mill floor, playing over the equipment. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps came closer. Entering the mill through the same side door I had, a man's voice called out, low and cautious. "Hello? Anyone here?" I stayed silent. The light swept the room, getting closer to the office. I could hear him climbing the stairs. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for the confrontation. The office door creaked open. The flashlight beam landed on the empty chair, the open filing cabinet drawer, the dislodged floorboard. "Damn it," the man muttered to himself. He wasn't looking for me. He was looking for what I was holding. He swept the light around the small office one more time before turning and heading back down the stairs. I waited, my muscles screaming with tension, until I heard the truck door slam again and the engine roar to life. I watched through a crack in the wall as the taillights disappeared back down the logging road. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. Who was that, and what did they want with this box? This wasn't just some forgotten property. Something was going on here, something my dad had tried to prepare me for. Shaken, I looked down at the box in my hands. The combination lock, 3 numbers. My dad wasn't a complicated man. He used the same numbers for everything. Anniversaries, birthdays. I tried my birthday, nothing. My mom's birthday, nothing. Their wedding anniversary, nothing. I felt a fresh wave of despair. Then I remembered. There was one number he always talked about, a number that meant the world to him. It wasn't a date. It was the address of the first house he ever lived in, the house he was born in, right here in Stone Creek. 482. He'd told me the story 100 times. My fingers were clumsy and cold, but I turned the dial. 482. I pulled on the latch. It clicked open. The contents of the box felt sacred. On top was a thick stack of envelopes, bound with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. They were addressed to me in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting. Underneath them were legal documents, the original deed to the sawmill, geological surveys of the property, and the incorporation papers for a company I'd never heard of, CW Timber Holdings, CW Clara Wells. And at the very bottom, there was a key to a safe deposit box and a small leather-bound notebook. My hands trembled as I picked up the first letter. The date on it was from 15 years ago, right after he'd bought the mill. "My dearest Clara," it began, "if you are reading this, it means a couple of things. First, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry for that, more than words can say. I hope it was peaceful. Second, it means you've found this place. I know you must have 1,000 questions. I'll try to answer them. I know you think I was just a simple carpenter, and I was, but I tried to be a smart one. I bought this old place for a song. The timber industry was dying up here and nobody wanted it. But I didn't buy it for the mill, honey. I bought it for the land it sits on. You remember me telling you stories about Stone Creek. This was my home. I knew these hills like the back of my hand, and I knew a secret about them. There's a vein of high-purity quartz that runs right under this property, the kind they use for making silicon chips. It's not gold, but in the right hands it's the next best thing. The geological surveys in this box will prove it. I never had the capital to do anything about it, but I had enough to buy the land and sit on it, to save it. For you, this is your foundation, Clara, a place to start over if you ever need to. I know you're with Marcus now. I know you think you love him. I see the way he looks at you and it makes you happy. But I also see the way he looks at what we have. He sees it as a stepping stone. He has ambition, but it's a cold ambition. It's the kind that hollows a person out. I've tried to talk to you, but you don't see it yet, and maybe I'm wrong. For your sake I pray to God I'm wrong. But a father knows. A carpenter knows when a piece of wood has a flaw in it, a weak spot that will crack under pressure. I see that flaw in him, so I set up the trust. This place is yours, and yours alone. He can never touch it. The law says so. If your life with him is everything you dream it will be, then you'll probably never even find this This mill will just crumble back into the earth, and that's fine. But if I'm right, if he ever breaks your heart, if he ever tries to leave you with nothing, then this will be here. Your secret, your strength. Don't sell it cheap, Clara. Know what it's worth. Know what you're worth. I love you more than all the trees in this forest. Love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight on my chest. He had seen it all. 15 years ago, he had looked into the future and seen this exact moment. He had seen my desolate rented room, my empty bank account, my broken heart, and he had prepared. He had sacrificed, scrimping and saving the money from his carpentry jobs to buy this land, to pay the taxes year after year, all to build a fortress around a daughter who didn't even know she was in danger. The guilt was a sharp, bitter pill. I had defended Marcus to him. I had told my dad he was being old-fashioned, that he didn't understand our love. I had chosen Marcus over my father's quiet warnings, and my father, instead of saying "I told you so," had simply built me a refuge and hidden the key. I spent the rest of the night in that dusty office reading through his letters. They spanned years. He wrote about his declining health, his frustration at not being able to fix the mill up himself. He wrote about his fears for me, but also his immense pride in my kindness, my resilience. He told me about the people in town, who to trust and who to watch out for. He mentioned the developers, a company called Northwood Holdings, who had been sniffing around the property for years, making lowball offers. He suspected they knew about the quartz. He warned me they were relentless. The man in the truck, he must have been from Northwood. They must have been tracking the tax delinquency, waiting for the county to foreclose so they could scoop it up at auction. The last letter was short, written only a few weeks before he died. His handwriting was shaky. "Clara, I'm tired, but I'm not scared, because I know that no matter what happens, you'll be okay. You have a strength in you that you haven't discovered yet. This place won't give you that strength, but it will give you the chance to find it. That's all a father can do. The rest is up to you. Build something good, honey, for me." When the sun came up, it found me hollowed out and filled up all at once. The grief was immense, but for the first time, it wasn't a lonely grief. My father was with me, his voice echoing in the silent mill. The path forward was terrifying, but it was clear. He hadn't just left me a piece of land. He had left me a choice. I could take the easy path he'd warned against, find the quickest buyer, take the money, and run. Or I could stay. I could fight. I could try to build something good. That morning, I drove back into town. I looked different in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, but they were clear. The diner was open. I went in and ordered a black coffee and toast. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Brenda, gave me a curious but friendly look. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "My father was a long time ago. His name was Thomas Wells." Brenda's face softened. "Tommy Wells, of course. I remember him. He was a few years ahead of me in school. A good man, quiet but solid as an oak. What brings his daughter to Stone Creek? He, left me something." The old sawmill, her eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be. That place has been sitting empty for 20 years. Some city folks have been trying to buy it up, offering pennies on the dollar." She leaned closer. "You be careful with them. They're vultures." At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the office of Gable & Sons. The man behind the desk was old, with a kind, wrinkled face and a shock of white hair. He looked up over his spectacles. "Can I help you?" "My name is Clara Wells," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I believe you've been managing a trust for me." Mr. Gable's expression didn't change, but a flicker of understanding crossed his eyes. He stood up slowly. "Miss Wells, I've been expecting you, for about 3 years in fact. Please, come in." His office was lined with books, just like my father's letters had described. He said my dad had loved the smell of old paper and leather. Mr. Gable had been my father's childhood friend. He was the one who had helped set up the whole thing, who had managed the trust after my father's death, paying the taxes out of a fund my dad had established until the money ran out 3 years ago. "Your father was a remarkable man," Gable said, his voice gentle. "He was convinced he was doing the right thing. He made me promise not to contact you when the trust dissolved and the property transferred to your name. He said you had to find it on your own. He said the journey to it was as important as the place itself." "The taxes are overdue," I said, getting straight to the point. "And a company called Northwood Holdings seems very interested in the property." Gable nodded grimly. "They are. They've been pestering me for years. They represent your ex-husband's family, you know." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "What?" "Marcus's father is a silent partner in Northwood. They've known about the quartz for a long time. They were just waiting waiting for your father to pass away, waiting for the trust to run out of money, waiting for the county to foreclose. They assumed you'd never know it existed, and they could buy it for the cost of the back taxes. Your divorce just accelerated their timeline. They figured you'd be desperate. The pieces clicked into place. The systematic way Marcus had stripped me of every asset, it wasn't just greed. It was a strategy. He was trying to make me desperate enough to overlook this, to let it slip through my fingers so his family could steal it. The betrayal was so profound it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't just that he didn't love me. It was that he had actively plotted my ruin for his own gain. They've made an offer, Gable said, sliding a piece of paper across his desk. They'll pay the back taxes and give you $50,000. Cash. You could walk away from all this today. $50,000. 6 months ago, that would have sounded like a lottery win. It was enough to pay off my debts, put a deposit on a small apartment, and start over somewhere new. It was the easy way out, was the escape hatch. But it wasn't the foundation. I looked at the offer, at the sterile, corporate letterhead. Then I thought of my father's shaky handwriting, of his faith in me. I thought of the man in the truck, circling like a predator. No, I said. The word felt solid, real. I'm not selling. Mr. Gable smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. I was hoping you'd say that. Your father would be very proud. But I don't have the money for the taxes, I admitted, the reality of my situation crashing back in. Your father thought of that too, he said, pulling a key from his drawer. It was identical to the one I'd found in the metal box. He left a safe deposit box at the local bank. It's not much, he said, but he hoped it would be enough to get you started. An hour later, I was standing in the vault of the Stone Creek Community Bank, holding the contents of the box. It was cash, $10,000, in neat bundles of 20s and 50s, and a short final note. For the taxes, and the first round of repairs. Make it yours, Clara, make it home. That afternoon, I walked into the Blackwood County Tax Assessor's office and paid the full amount of the delinquency in cash. The clerk, a woman who looked as tired as the town itself, barely blinked. But as she stamped my receipt paid in full, I felt a seismic shift inside me. I was no longer a victim. I was a landowner. I was a fighter. I was my father's daughter. The next few months were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The work was backbreaking. I started with the office, sweeping out decades of dust and grime. I patched the roof, replaced the broken window panes, and scrubbed the floors until the scent of pine returned to the wood. I moved my 2 boxes of belongings in and set up a small cot in the corner. That dusty, overlooked office became my home. Northwood Holdings didn't give up. They sent lawyers. They sent surveyors who tried to trespass on my property. They sent official-looking letters threatening legal action over zoning disputes and environmental regulations. Each time I would take the letter to Mr. Gable. He would read it, snort, and draft a calm, firm response that sent them scurrying back to their corner. He was my rock, my guide through the legal jungle they were trying to create. The town watched me. At first it was with suspicion, then with curiosity, then slowly with respect. Brenda from the diner started sending over hot meals. "You're too skinny," she'd say. "Gotta eat if you're gonna fight." An old man named Hank, who had worked at the mill as a teenager under my grandfather, showed up one day with a toolbox. He didn't say much. He just started fixing things. He repaired the hinges on the main doors. He got the old generator working. He taught me the difference between a rip cut and a cross cut. He told me stories about my dad as a boy, a skinny kid who was always climbing the tallest trees. Through them, I started to feel a sense of belonging I hadn't felt since I was a child. I wasn't just Clara Wells, the divorcee. I was Tommy Wells's daughter. I was the woman who was bringing the old sawmill back to life. I used the geological surveys my father had left my advantage. With Mr. Gable's help, I had them independently verified and filed a mineral rights claim that was ironclad. Northwood could no longer pretend the land was just worthless timber country. Its true value was now a matter of public record. Their strategy of acquiring it on the cheap was dead. One day I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Marcus. His voice was smooth, conciliatory. He said he'd heard what I was doing. He said he was impressed. He said his family was willing to make a much more substantial offer, a partnership even. They would fund the entire mining operation, and I would be a majority shareholder. "We could be rich, Clara," he said, his voice dripping with the false intimacy we used to share. Richer than we ever dreamed. I listened to him and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even a flicker of the old love. His voice was just a noise on the other end of the line. The man I had loved was a ghost, a fiction I had told myself. The real man was this cold, calculating opportunist. "The land is not for sale, Marcus," I said, and I hung up. I didn't end up mining the quartz. My father's letters made it clear that he saw it as a last resort, a bargaining chip. His dream was for me to build something, so that's what I did. I started small. I used the old, sturdy lumber from the collapsing sheds to build furniture, desks, tables, bookshelves, things my father would have made. I sold them at local craft fairs and then online. The story sold them as much as the quality. Furniture made from the reclaimed wood of a historic sawmill, brought back to life by the founder's granddaughter. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar mining operation, but it was mine. It was honest work done with my own 2 hands. The sawmill wasn't roaring back to life, but it was breathing again. It was a workshop, a home, a sanctuary. A year after I first arrived in Stone Creek, I stood on the hill overlooking the property. The main building had a new roof. The windows gleamed in the afternoon sun. Flowers grew in pots by the office door. It wasn't a ruin anymore, it was a homestead. I had paid my own way, built my own business, and forged my own community. I had taken the foundation my father had secretly laid for me, and I had built a life on it. He was right. The strength wasn't in the land or the quartz or the money. It was in the act of choosing to fight, of choosing to build instead of run. He hadn't just left me an inheritance, he had left me a map back to myself. Home isn't always 4 walls and a roof that someone else provides for you. Sometimes it's a promise you make to yourself in a dark and dusty place. It's the decision to pick up a hammer and start repairing the broken things, one nail at a time. It's the understanding that the most valuable things we inherit aren't things at all, but the love that saw our future and the faith that we would be strong enough to claim it. This journey taught me that we all have a secret inheritance. It might not be a sawmill hidden on a piece of paper. It might be a talent you've neglected, a friendship you've let slide, or a quiet resilience you've never given yourself credit for. It's the part of you that no one can take away in a divorce or a bankruptcy or a betrayal. It's your foundation. What's the foundation you're building on? I'd genuinely love to know. Share your story in the comments below. So many of us are rebuilding something, and there's so much strength in knowing we're not doing it alone. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. This community is for all of—
Not the youngster references, Emma. What the? Okay, we need a little bit more fencing. I also, wait, do we have more pedestals? I sure hope so. Oh, perfect. I think I only have 1 pokey lamp though, which, oh no, we have 2. Oh my God, we're so prepared. Okay. Perfect. All right, we put up a little rooftop patio. Our house is on the 2nd floor. I think we put some of that stuff over there. Also, Emma, what? Okay, Lepa. God forbid a girl wants a trauma bond with her friends. I'm dying. You know what? You're right. That's on me, and I'm sorry. Frost, Chesto, Pecha, Lum. Okay, we're still missing a couple others, but this is a pretty good start. Do you need that? We'll put that back in for now. Wait, do we put a gate in? Maybe. Okay. Okay, at what point can we craft those things? Oh, I guess this is not that point. So we'll go to Withered Wasteland and like make a couple things.